but the first step. Any realization of what you want, no matter how noble it may be, will require you to engage in a process that places you and positions you on the path towards success. Whatever you have become as an individual up to this point in your life, and whatever we have become as a people, is a direct result of a process that we all have participated in on one level or another. And if we want to see ourselves moving through this world with power, purpose, and passion, it will only happen through our commitment to and execution of a process designed to develop our greatness as children of God. Now, I have to ask a question this morning. You are indeed aware of the fact that you were created for greatness, right? But just in case you forgot, my assignment this morning is to remind you that you are great, and we are great as a people. You see, when somebody looks at you, greatness ought to reflect back at them before a word even flows across your lips. And if for some reason you're not radiating greatness this morning, don't worry yourself. Greatness is our goal, but let's spend just a little time this morning working on the process, and trust me on this, that the goal will take care of itself. Can you trust me on that this morning? But you see, a process takes time. And unfortunately, most of us are not willing to commit the time necessary to be our best self. This is because we live in a nation obsessed with overnight success stories. And if you've been watching Good Morning America for the last couple of days, they've been in the process of trying to see if they can take an average teenager and turn her into an overnight music sensation. It never ceases to amaze me that we can't sink it into our spirits or wrap our mind around the concept that an overnight success would only lead to an early morning disaster. Why? Because it takes time to be successful at anything. And in my opinion, but this is just my humble opinion, the most crippling and disempowering moves that the founders of the early Christian church made was that of turning Jesus into an individual, unique person and an overnight success. Jesus just pops in on the scene, at least according to the Gospel of Mark, at the age of 30-something, preaching and healing. But never is there a mention about the process that he went through, the learning curve he had to go through, and the mistakes he had to make in order to get the thing right in the first place. We don't get all that background information. We just assume that Jesus was an overnight success. But that's not true. Through the process of historical criticism, which is nothing but a technique that has been used for many, many years in the literary field, where they would go and look at a piece of novel work or a movie, and they began to critique that movie and try to place it within some historical context. Well, around the early 19th century, historical criticism became a major player in biblical studies. In other words, they would take the Bible and place the Bible in some historical context. Well, when this happened with the New Testament, Jesus was then placed inside of the context of a Jewish Palestinian people. So when they did that, what began to emerge was a Jesus that looked like an ordinary brother who was influenced and shaped by the religious processes of his people, the black nation Israel, that was handed down from generation to generation. In other words, the greatness of Jesus had more to do with the processes he engaged in over time that allowed him to perform the miracles. It wasn't about his birth in a ghetto, but it was more about understanding Jesus through this historical criticism and the research that came from it, that Jesus was not the exception, but Jesus was an expression of what was normal and possible for all of us. What Jesus did, Jesus took some practical steps that over time allowed him to experience major change and transformation that was just a part of the normal progression. I say that Jesus engaged in the process because his disciples picked up and engaged in this same process, and their greatness was realized also. It was a simple yet effective process that anyone could use. Look, the process is right in the text before us this morning. If you would go to the gospel, I'll be going to Acts chapter 2, verse 42. That's Acts chapter 2, verse 42. The Bible records that continually they devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings, to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings. That says to me that new members and seasoned members of the faith community shared a commitment to studying the implications and the application of the Word of God in light of the growing world in which they exist. Most of us, if we are honest, have stopped reading the Bible a long time ago, except on Sunday mornings. If we are honest, we have 3 and 4 Bibles in the house. One of them is opened up on our altar, but we very rarely go to that Bible and start reading. Am I right or wrong? You don't have to say yourself, but I'm just saying, most of us have stopped reading the Bible a long time ago, because for us it's like I've been there and I've done that. I don't need to go back to that Bible no more. I heard all the stories growing up. But I have to submit to you this morning that it is indeed impossible for you to read the Bible at 41 years old and interpret the Bible the same way you did when you were 21 years old. Why? It's impossible. Why? Because you bring your experiences with you as you read the Bible. And you're not the same person today that you were 20 years ago. So I don't care how many times you read that scripture. If you bring your whole self, all of your life experiences to the reading of that text, you will come away with a different meaning. I don't care how many times you read a particular text over and over and over again. You see, the reading of the Old Testament daily linked the disciples to their history as a people and their struggles inherent in remaining faithful to God and to each other. They were engaging in the process of study. The new members and seasoned members continually devoted themselves to fellowship. In other words, they had fun together. There was joy and happiness whenever they got together. Each person brought a unique flavor to the mission, which made it special and lively. Everybody here this morning, where I just polled the audience, love a good fellowship. We say fellowship, well, let me break it down like this. Everybody in here loves a good party. Am I right or wrong? I mean, you like to go to a good party where it's popping, where it's off the chain. Everybody loves a good party. Everybody loves a good fellowship. I'm going to tell you why I know this is true. If you sit down and look at any commercial, a beer commercial, a soft drink commercial, or a food commercial on television, what they are really selling is a good time. They're selling a fellowship. So when you find yourself in a grocery store, you remember very little about the attributes of the product. But what you do remember is the sense of fellowship. And you figure if you get that product, you're gonna actually experience the fellowship. So what do? You pick up the product because you want to experience the fellowship. I submit this morning that the disciples were engaging in the process of fellowshipping together. I mean, new members and seasoned members continually devoted themselves to the breaking of bread. It was this sacramental lifestyle practiced by the community that helped the disciples to walk on waters of trouble in days of difficulty and in uncertain tomorrows without sinking. It's this idea that they were continually, without ceasing, praying for themselves and praying for one another. And each time they took the bread and consumed the wine, they were recommitting themselves fully to doing the will of God from that point going forward. All the mistakes of yesterday really didn't matter. Those were just learning marks. They were recommitting themselves to doing the will of God from that point going forward. The disciples were engaging in the process of breaking bread together. New members and seasoned members continually devoted themselves to prayer. It was prayer that allowed them to defeat their doubts. It was prayer that kept the disciples planted in the work of kingdom building. Even when they wanted to uproot and go back to another way of life that was less demanding and void of accountability. But can I remind somebody this morning that any time a people are struggling to be free, you will always have demands placed on you and you will always be accountable for your actions. It was a prayer life of the disciples that renewed them, refreshed them, and revived them. The disciples were engaged in a process of praying together. It was this total process of studying and fellowshipping and breaking bread and praying continuously that helped the disciples to become the great men and women of God that they became. They engaged in the processes over and over again. It didn't happen overnight, But the power was increased because the disciples realized the release and the experience of the power that came to them as they engaged in the processes faithfully. The Bible testifies to this, that the disciples gained power when it says in verse 43, and everyone kept feeling a sense of awe, and many wonders and signs were taking place through the apostles. The same can be said for you and for me. Whatever change we desire, whatever desired self that we see for us can be realized in our life. Whatever we want to be in life can be realized if we first engage in a process that leads to transformation. No, it will not happen overnight, but I guarantee you it will happen. You see, in this church, new members and seasoned members continually devote themselves to small group experiences that help us become our best self. Now, we have to engage the process. It doesn't work on osmosis. We have to put ourselves in the group in order to get something from the group. But we have to engage the process. In this church, new members and seasoned members continually devote themselves to the breaking of bread over communal meals like love feasts, where we learn the value of serving one another with dignity and respect. But we have to engage the process to get something from the process. And just like the disciples of Jesus, every time we partake of the bread and the wine, we are recommitting ourselves to being healing agents for one another and transforming agents in the world. When we participate in the sacrament process of what we call the Holy Communion, seriously, I'm not just talking about walking up there getting a piece of bread and getting a little wine or getting a little juice and you go back to your seat, but you never at once sat down to reflect on, why am I taking this sacrament? What am I recommitting myself to? Or is it just something I do every first Sunday, just go through the motions, but never realizing the power that is inside of the communion that we take each and every Sunday? Do we just go through the motions? I submit this morning, when we participate in the sacrament process of Holy Communion seriously, we are saying in no uncertain terms, live in me, Jesus. I'll be your mouth to talk. I'll be your legs to walk. I'll be your hands to work through. I'll be your heart to love through. Live in me, Jesus. Why? Because I may be the only Jesus that this generation may ever see. So live in me, Jesus. When we take that sacrament, we're recommitting ourselves to be just like Jesus in the world. Is that why you take the sacrament in this church? To be just like Jesus. These and other processes that this church offers helps us to develop our inner divinity. What is your process for realizing your greatness? What do you do day in and day out, unceasing, continuously? What is it that you do? It's not that we don't have grand ideas about what we want to be in life, but do we have a process that helps us to realize the things that we want to become in life? What is your process? If you don't have one, I suggest this morning that you just build upon the ones that I just laid out to you in this sermon. And then if you find yourself wondering, like, what is it that I can do? How can I develop myself? If you just look around at someone who is doing what you want to do and look at the best practices that they have developed and incorporate those practices into your daily life. Just see somebody doing what you want to do and then begin to mimic that in your own life. You know, Michael Jackson was a great entertainer. Can't nobody argue with the fact that Michael Jackson was a great entertainer. But what we don't realize is that Michael Jackson put in a whole lot of time. He had this uncompromising propensity for excellence. And I'll never forget, I was probably in like the 7th grade. And Michael Jackson came to Beaumont, Texas. Now mind you, I'm from Beaumont. I'm from the right side of Texas. And this was at the fairground. I mean, when I say the fairground, I mean, Michael Jackson came to Beaumont. Now, we have this big old arena where they have rodeos. Now, it's dirt on the ground. Michael Jackson is coming to Beaumont, Texas to perform in an arena where they have rodeos. He hadn't always been in these big old fine buildings and these big old auditoriums that we see Michael Jackson in. He started in some little parties in the neighborhood, you know, going to these little Jew joints. He hadn't always been at the top. We see Michael Jackson at the top, but we don't see his struggle. We don't know all the work that he had to go through to get to where he was. We want the finished product. We want success without struggle. We want change without giving up anything. We want life to be better, but we don't want to be better. We just want something for nothing, and it never happens that way. It is true today as it was yesterday. It costs to be the boss. Nothing is free. Look at our history. It tells us this. Now, you may never have a star on the Walk of Fame in Hollywood. You may never be famous, but I tell you this morning, you can be great. Our history attests to that. Even in this church, Cardinal Amanifo, he wasn't a famous man. He wasn't famous, but he was great. He was a great man. And he used his process of working through the skills that he had as a social worker. He saved so many lives in this church. He'll never have a star in Hollywood. But he was indeed a great man who had a process that led him to his greatness. To my young people in here, Tupac was great. But Tupac had a work ethic that was out of this world. He read broadly. He read the New York Times. He read about Machiavelli. He read about Plato's Republic. He read about the struggles of black people in our own classic history. He put in the time and he put in the work. He had a process, and he worked that process to a T. It wasn't overnight success for him either. And every now and then, my young people, I'm talking to you this morning, every now and then, when somebody tries to take away your greatness, you have to tell them like Jay-Z, I have 99 problems, but having faith in myself and God ain't one. You have to have that kind of faith. You have to have that kind of faith in your own greatness, that you were created for greatness. But there has to be a process. There has to be a method to the madness. And that's what your goal in life is to find a process that helps you realize your greatness. It's already in you. All you have to do is find a process. Something that you do day in and day out without ceasing that makes you better over time. This church has been here for 57 years. It's been constant work over time, day in and day out, day in and day out, that has us to the place where we are right now. We are in 4 different places. We're in Atlanta, in Detroit, in Houston, in South Carolina, and in Africa. And a brother said to me this week, he says, I don't understand how this church does so much with so little. I had never really thought about it before. He said, but how can this church, I come out every Sunday, and I don't see a whole lot of people, but how do y'all keep doing all this stuff? How do y'all keep educating kids in the Learning Center? How do y'all keep the bookstore going? How do y'all keep having an impact in the community, and you don't have a whole lot of people? I said, but we have a whole lot of committed people, and that makes all the difference in the world. It's not just pure numbers. It's the commitment in those people who come here day in and day out, in good times and in bad times, and continue working the process. That's all we have, is the process that leads to our greatness. I don't know what your process is this morning, but I hope and pray that you find one. I really hope and pray that you find a process that you can work day in and day out that will lead towards your greatness. Because God put it in you. You just have to be in the right environment where it can come out of you and do what God has called you to do. The doors to the church are open. When I open the doors to the church, I simply ask that everyone that can stand, please stand at this time. when we open the doors to the church, we simply give each person visiting with us an opportunity to join this great fellowship, to get into a process that would help you to become all that God created you to be. The doors to the church are open. Just simply walk down the aisle and shake my hand. The doors to the church are open. There may be one. The doors to the church are open. There's plenty of work to be done, but you are indeed well able to handle it. The doors to the church are open. There may be one this morning. Before you sit down, I simply want you to look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, oh neighbor, I'm engaging in the process that will lead to my greatness. Now say it like you mean it. Say, neighbor,